In this video, I'm using a new method to cook pulled pork, and I'm comparing it to the traditional method to see which one is better. And I'm doing it all on my Pitts Spitts Maverick 1250 with the new smoke cage attachment. Is this new method going to make you want to change the way you cook pulled pork forever? We'll find out in this video. Let's get smoking. My long hold brisket method is a huge hit with viewers, and it's been helping them cook amazingly juicy briskets without any guesswork. But I've been getting a lot of comments recently asking me to try the method for pulled pork as well. I did a video in the past holding pork butts overnight at 165 degrees, but I found that they came out kind of a little bit drier, and the regular method of just smoking to 200 plus internal to probe tender and then resting for 2 hours and pulling them was actually better, and it tasted more juicy and tender. But after using my long hold method on both briskets and ribs, I fine-tuned it, and I found that the magic temperature zone is around 150 degrees Fahrenheit. So in this video, I'm going to hold the pork butt at 150 degrees Fahrenheit instead of 165, and we'll see if it comes out more juicy and tender than the traditional method. For seasoning, I'm trying out this Pitts Spitts sweet and spicy rub. Pork butts love a sweet rub with lots of sugar, so I have really high hopes for this. I'm applying an ample amount to both of these boneless pork butts, and then I'll let them sit for around 30 minutes to soak up the rub. Moving on outside, I'm preheating my Pitts Spitts Maverick 1250 to 300 degrees. Yes, that's right, 300 degrees, and if you guys have smoked on pellet grills before, you'll know that there's two problems with this. The first one is that at 300 degrees, the pellets burn really cleanly, so they don't give off a lot of smoke, and as a result, you don't get a lot of smoke flavor on your meat. And the second is that if you smoke at 300 degrees, you're very likely to burn the bottom of your meat with the radiant heat coming off of the deflector plate from below. But I have a way to get around these disadvantages using both a water pan and the Pitts Spitts smoke cage, and I'll explain that in just a second. So, starting with how we get more smoke at 300 degrees. The smoke cage is going to solve for that and give us some nice offset quality smoke. I'm placing some wood chunks in the cage and putting it over the top of the burn pot until it gets nice and lit. Then I place it to the side of the burn pot. I've got a lot of questions asking me how the smoke cage stays lit if it's not always on top of the burn pot. It just does. There's lots of airflow that is provided by the fan that is coming through the burn pot, and that seems to feed the smoke cage that's right beside the burn pot. Starting with a pretty good coal bed, that smoke cage is going to stay lit as long as you add chunks every, I'd say, 20 to 40 minutes. Next, we're going to deal with the radiant heat. I'm placing a water pan on the lower rack, and I'm going to fill it about halfway. Usually I use water, but there's lots of high quality Canadian snow all around me right now, so I'm just using that. The water pan is going to soak up the radiant heat from below, so the pork butts that are on the top rack just get exposed to gentle convective heat. That'll help them cook much more evenly and prevent them from drying out. The water pan will also catch all the drippings from the pork for easier cleanup. Brief barbecue nerd tirade here. This is probably one of my top 3 tips for really good barbecue. Temperature is not energy. And in the context of smokers, what that means is sometimes you can be looking at the thermometer on your smoker, maybe it's the dome thermometer or a remote probe, and it'll be reading, let's say, 250 degrees Fahrenheit. But if you're getting a lot of radiant heat, whether it's from the deflector plate on a pellet grill, it could be from the sidewalls of an offset smoker, the baffle plate on a reverse flow smoker, or a deflector plate that's on a Kamado or a WSM smoker where the heat is coming from below, all of those are big chunks of metal. They hold on to a lot of heat energy, and they radiate that energy into your meat. So if you don't have some way of blocking that radiant heat or defeating it somehow, that radiant heat is going to go directly into the bottom of your pork butt or your brisket or whatever meat you're cooking, and it's going to kind of double cook your meat. You're going to get 250 degrees of convective air that's cooking the bottom of your meat and the top, and you're going to get an extra, this isn't how it works thermodynamically, but you might be getting an extra 300 degrees equivalent worth of temperature that's hitting the bottom of your brisket or your pork butt. So that's often why when people smoke on a pellet grill at 300 degrees Fahrenheit, you're actually smoking at 300 degrees Fahrenheit convective heat, plus you're getting a ton of radiant energy from the deflector plate, which might be as hot as 300 to 400 degrees. It's heating up, it's shedding a lot of radiant energy, and it's burning the bottom of your brisket. So in order to defeat that, what I recommend using is a water pan. Water it's magic, guys. It's amazing. It holds on to a ton of heat energy, and it has a built-in safeguard in it that steel does not. Steel just gets hotter and hotter and hotter as it rises in temperature, but water continues to retain heat until it reaches around 212 degrees Fahrenheit, depending on your height from sea level, and then it phase changes into steam. So not only is there a fail-safe there that prevents the water temperature from getting higher than 212 degrees Fahrenheit and burning your meat with a lot of radiant heat, it also takes a ton of energy for that phase change to happen. So the water is absorbing radiant heat because it has a huge specific capacity to retain heat, and then it takes even more energy to phase change. Plus it has that fail-safe where it can't get above 212 degrees Fahrenheit. So it is a magic bullet to defeat radiant heat, and I highly recommend you use it. Put it in between whatever is getting hot and shedding that radiant heat and your meat, and you should be good to go. Okay, so we've got our smoke cage, water pan, and pork butts set up, and we're running at 300 degrees Fahrenheit. Now I'm just adding a few wood chunks to the smoke cage every 20 to 40 minutes, and we're letting those butts smoke until the next step. Before we take these butts off the smoker, I'd like to thank Pitts Spitts for sponsoring this video. I've been using my Maverick 1250 for a while now, and I absolutely love it. This thing is a barbecue beast, and I've smoked some of the best briskets I've ever made on it. And just when I thought this beefy, hand-welded champion of fire-spitting metal couldn't get any better, they released the smoke cage, which allows me to get offset smoker flavor on this pellet grill. And I don't say that lightly. I'm an offset guy at heart, and I know what offset smoker flavor tastes like, and this gets the job done. As long as you're willing to add new chunks every 20 to 30 minutes. It's a little bit of an inconvenience, but you get a lot of flavor on the back end. And even if you don't want to add chunks every 20 to 30 minutes, you could just add them at the beginning, and you're still getting a ton more smoke than you would normally get on a pellet grill. If you guys want to see another video where I cook a brisket on the Maverick and I review the smoke cage, then I'll link it over here. You guys can check it out. And also check out the Pitts Spitts Maverick 1250 in the description section below, and the smoke cage. Highly recommended if you're looking for the pinnacle of quality for pellet smokers. They're US made, they're hand welded, they're gonna last you for generations, and they produce amazing results. All right, back to the video. I'm smoking the first pork butt until it reaches at least 190 internal everywhere I probe. At this point, the pork is still a bit tough, but it's still retaining a lot of moisture and porky flavor because it hasn't been taken up to 200 degrees plus. Then it comes off the Maverick, it gets wrapped in a pan with half a cup of water, foiled tightly and held at 150 degrees for 18 to 20 hours. This is going to remove any lingering toughness from the pork butt, and because we only finished it to 190, it's not going to get grainy and dry, and it's not going to lose the pork flavor, which usually happens when you get above 200 and you finish at higher temperatures. Well, that's the theory anyway. That's what we're going to test in this video. We'll see if that's actually the case. Now for the second pork butt, I'm taking it to around 180 degrees Fahrenheit, and then I'm wrapping it in foil with a bit of water added, and then I'm continuing to cook it until it gets to around 205 internal, but most importantly, it probes tender like room temperature butter. This is the traditional way of cooking pork butt. Then it gets rested for 2 hours, ideally until it drops to around 140 degrees internal, and then I'm starting the taste test. Okay, the first pork butt is done, the one that I took up to 205 degrees Fahrenheit, and then I rested it for 2 hours. It is probing at around, let me get my thermopan out here. It is probing at around 160, so a little bit higher than I usually like. I usually go down to 140, but it's 11 p.m. here and I need to get this test done and go to bed. So let's open this up. It smells smoky. Oh yeah, that's feeling nice. It looks really nice and dark. The bark is really well developed, so I'm happy with the color. I'm happy with the rub, really nice texture. This doesn't have a bone, but usually what I do is just pull the bone right out. But that's been removed already. So we'll just kind of dig into this with our hands. It's pulling apart really easily. I'll show you guys this muscle group here. So looking pretty good, a little bit dry, but these muscles usually do look a little bit dry. So let's take a look at the money muscle now. I'll just pull it right apart. Super tender. This looks really nice and juicy. And if we go to the very center of the pork butt, usually there's at least one holdout zone that's kind of tough, and this one does not have that, so that means we got the job done. There are some areas of the pork butt that look pretty dry. This was one of the edges. You can see that it looks kind of grainy, so that's kind of problematic, but realistically, when we blend all this together in pulled pork, it would all kind of get soaked with the fat and no one would really notice. But I can see that there are some dry bits. That's kind of dry. This bit is kind of dry, but there's also some tender bits. The money muscle is really nice and tender. Some of the pieces from the center of the butt are nice and juicy. This is the muscle group that was right under the fat cap, and that's usually what I'd serve as pulled pork in a competition box at a KCBS competition. So I'll take a bite from the muscle group that was right under the fat cap. Really good, flavorful, kind of a little bacony flavor almost. Pretty typical for what I'm used to at a competition. I'll take a bite of the money muscle now. Nice and tender, doesn't have a lot of flavor, kind of grainy, but a lot of fat to make up for that loss of moisture because I took it up to 205, but still pretty good. Now I'll try out some of these stringy pieces. Pretty dry, but that part of the pork butt usually is pretty dry. And now I'm gonna try to find the driest part. This is pretty dry here. Here's a good example. You can see how it looks pretty dry. I'm gonna try that out. Really dry, chewy, not a lot of moisture, kind of grainy and sandy. It's drying out my mouth as I eat it. So there are some dry parts on this pork butt. There are some tender parts. There's some moist parts. So overall, I would totally serve this up and people would be blown away by it. The bark is amazing. The flavor is amazing. Everything is great about it. So I'm interested to find out if the long hold pork butt is any better than this one. Okay, let's take a look at this guy. This is the pork butt that was held overnight. Well, not quite overnight. It's been held for 20 hours in the sous vide heating chest. And I'm just going to give it a quick temp here to make sure I don't get botulism. It's actually exactly 151, 152, 151. That's a really good sign. That tells me it's been holding at that exact temperature, around 150, for the last 20 hours. So let's pull this apart and we'll see what we see. Okay. It's pretty tender so far. It's pulling apart really nicely. Everything is really tender, really juicy. Appearance-wise, I don't see any dry areas. There are some slightly dry areas around the edges. So right there. So I'll keep that. Put that to the side there. That's the driest part. This is the part that was directly under the fat cap. Again, this is the part that I use to turn in for pulled pork at barbecue competitions. It's usually the most tender strands. And then we have part of the money muscle here. So we'll start with the money muscle. Ooh. Super tender, no hint of dryness at all. A lot of porky flavor. Looking good so far. Let's try this pulled pork here. 1,000% better than the one that I took up to 200 degrees plus last night. The pulled pork that was right under the fat cap here tastes really porky. It's really moist. It's a lot better rendered. And it's got more flavor. Let's try one of the barky pieces that's kind of dry. See how that tastes. It's kind of dry in some areas around the edges, but that's to be expected. We had that with the pork butt that we cooked normally last night. But for the most part, most of this pork butt is a lot more tender and juicy and better rendered in terms of the fat and the collagen than the one that I had last night. Now, I heated up some of the pork butt that I tried last night just for comparison, and I'm going to try that now, just to be as accurate as possible. So what did I like better? Well, hands down, I liked the long hold pork butt a lot better. It was less grainy, it was more porky and sweet in flavor, and it was just generally more tender and flavorful. The pork butt I cooked the traditional way, up to 205 probe tender. It was just more grainy, more dry, less flavorful. There was not much going for it. So like the experiments I've done with brisket and ribs, the long hold method appears to work for pork butt and pulled pork, and it appears to produce superior results, at least in my opinion, and this is something I worry about very often. Maybe I'm just some sort of crazy brisket sommelier and my tastes have gone so far beyond what everyday people like that it's not really realistic, and you might not actually like this long hold pork or this long hold brisket or these long hold ribs that I make. So I'd really like to hear your guys' opinion on whether you'd try this method, and if you do try it, let me know how it turns out, and if you like it better than the traditional way. I'm really interested to hear your feedback. And if you're interested in getting more involved in the Smoke Trails barbecue community, then drop a comment, like, subscribe, and also follow me on Instagram. Join the Smoke Trails Barbecue Nerds Facebook group. You can join the Patreon in the description section below, where we have a great community of people who are always nerding out on barbecue and trying to get better. So I hope to see you there, and I'll definitely see you in the next video. Happy smoking.